Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second of our New Jersey Community College Practitioner Scholars uh, webinar series. We're pleased to have Dr. Ariella Panek lead us off today from the County College of Morris. We welcome all of you. Dr. Kristen Wilson's going to be on shortly after Ariella. What we're going to do is, as both Dr. Panek and Dr. Wilson are going through their presentations. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. We're going to have a little time after Ariella's presentation, a little time after Kristen's presentation, so we can address questions once Ariella finishes her presentation, and then we'll transition to Kristen's presentation. So with that, thank you all for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it, and we're going to turn it over to you, Dr. Panek. Thank you for doing this for us.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Fardman. I appreciate everyone attending today. In the interest of time, I want to be respectful and make sure that everyone gets questions. And if they have them, feel free to contact me if you have additional information, because I'll be going through some of the data pretty quickly, but I'd be happy to talk to you offline about this as well. So I'm very excited to be sharing this information. It's recent data as well. It was conducted in I defended in 2022. So I anecdotally always thought that there was a relationship between one's well-being and retention, the students' ability to complete their education, but I never had the data. And as a lifelong counselor, I really wanted to learn to see if what I learned anecdotally was also represented in the research. So one of the big things, and I might go through this kind of quickly because we're all community college professionals, so we may be mindful of this already, but well-being is something that can really influence every student's trajectory when it comes to their education, specifically in a community college setting. Unfortunately, however, though there's information about mental health more recently, there really isn't information about overall comprehensive holistic well-being. And I'm going to define what that means in just a moment. But because, as we know, community college students experience more complex difficulties, first gen students, more mental health concerns, caretakers, working full time, they have all these additional obstacles that can impede their ability from being successful in their classes. Yet we don't know how well-being falls into that and how it really influences our students. So again, I wanted to learn more about that because there was little to no research about that in general, but there was zero with community college students. So I did a mixed method study. I am a glutton for punishment, but I also wanted to learn from a survey as well as from interviewing students who were academically at risk. And I defined that on three different categories. So either students were on or previously on academic probation, they were returned from being academically dismissed, or they fully withdrew voluntarily from all of their courses for one or more semesters. So really briefly, I wanted to learn if there were differences between the well-being variables and student demographics. I really worked hard in getting a lot of diversity when it came to our representation. I wanted to know if the relationships among the well-being variables were the same or different. So I utilized the Healthy Mind Study, which is from the University of Michigan. Some of you may have heard of it. And it really focuses on students' well-being as a whole. And I focused on the 8 dimensions of wellness, and I'll talk to you about that in just a moment, but more specifically, financial, social, physical, emotional, and flourishing well-being. I focus on a specific question that I'll get to, and then I really wanted to highlight what resources students were using, what caused them from being academically at risk, and what they felt they needed and wanted in order to do well in their studies. So well-being, like I said, when we think about well-being, we see it on TV all the time. We see it highlighted all over the place. But most of the time, we're talking about physical and emotional well-being. I use the 8 Dimensions of Wellness, which is from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration by Peggy Swarbrick. And she is phenomenal. I was actually able to interview her, and she was the person who really first started out with the 6 dimensions of wellness, and now it's the 8 dimensions of wellness. And you probably have something like that on your campus. There's a lot of different versions. So I utilized that, but I also utilized Dr. Seligman's theory as well for well-being. And I thought that was really important because that talked about different barriers and obstacles that would impede them that is external to the learning environment. And I thought that was really important. I also wanted to focus on retention, persistence, and attrition. And what was important about this was, again, it's very different than Tinto's model, very different from that 4-year institution. So I wanted to use specific models for community college students. A lot of models focus on the deficit model, which means they want students to reach out to them, whereas with community college students, we really need to initiate that support while maintaining DEI background and making sure that we're reaching all students, not just different subsets. This is the methodology. So I worked with a mid-sized community college. So MSCC was I coined it, not Middlesex Community College, which is now Middlesex College. But that if you see MSCC, that's what mid-sized community college. That's what that stands for. So we had almost 20% response rate of the Healthy Minds study. What I did was I reviewed it all. I wanted to see different trends. And then from that information, I used that data to ask pointed questions to 5 academic probation students, 5 academically dismissed students, and 5 students who voluntarily and fully withdrew. And from that point, I was able to really utilize both sets of data to form suggestions that I learned from it. This is pretty representative of the students we had at the college at MSCC at that point in time. Now there is a lot more diversity, but back then this is what the landscape looked like. I made sure that we had a lot of diversity with the specifically with the qualitative piece, the interviews. So as you can see, we have someone as young as 20 to as old as 33. We have about 4 Latina students, 4 white, 3 Black African American, and 3 biracial. So what did I find with the quantitative results? So I really focused on this slide of the significant findings. So one thing that I wanted to focus on was the emotional well-being. As you can see, this is in line with the national data. So you may be asking, well, was this conducted during the pandemic? And the answer is yes, it was. However, it's in line with the national data prior to when the pandemic occurred. And in 2019, the data was 1 in 3 college students had a mental health concern. So this is really poignant because it shows that the lifetime diagnosis is almost 1 in 2 students. And that is lifetime. It's not just during the pandemic period. And one can and should argue that now these numbers are even higher post-pandemic because we're dealing with a lot of residual trauma, lack of resiliency, and lack of coping skills, which I know we're all seeing within our institutions. No surprise here, social well-being, which is loneliness. More than half of our students felt very isolated. Financial well-being, our students were really impacted by COVID, but we also have students, 64% of them reported finances were stressful growing up. So it wasn't just specific to COVID. In fact, I believe at MSCC, there was about 60% of students who were receiving Pell Grants. And then when it comes to flourishing well-being, that was really defined as feeling accomplished, feeling meaning in life, feeling confident, feeling like you had purpose and that you had relationships that made you feel complete. Out of the assessment tool that the Healthy Mind Study utilized, only 38% of that student body was deemed as positive mental health. So when I continue to look at the survey, I found that there were distinct relationships. And I'm going to go through this slide quickly, but please reach out to me if you really want the more in-depth data. As I suspected, if someone was flourishing and felt meaning in life, it was associated with their social well-being, emotional well-being, and there was a moderate relationship between someone's emotional well-being and financial well-being, which was definitely interesting. The reason why I chose this topic more specifically was the second bullet right here. Are there statistically significant relationships between well-being variables and students' responses to, in the past 4 weeks, how many days have you felt that emotional or mental difficulties have hurt your academic performance? 84% of the students said 1 or more days, and 33% said 6 or more. And when I interviewed them, and I'll get to that in a second, they really defined emotional or mental difficulties as a whole bunch of different categories: financial, social, occupational, but it impacted their emotions. It impacted their ability to do well in their classes, specifically with emotional well-being. And I did find some differences in demographics. So students who were 35 and older, not surprisingly, the literature does back this up. They possess more social, emotional, and flourishing well-being than the 18 to 24-year-olds. What was interesting was the 25 to 34 age group possessed more social well-being than the 21 to 24 age group. However, the 21 to 24 age group did not significantly have more social well-being than the 18 to 20-year-olds, which means that this data suggests that the students 21 to 24 were more lonely than any of the other subgroups. The 18 to 20-year-olds had more financial well-being. And again, that was mostly because they stated in the interviews that they were living at home and they had a little more financial support. Men participants are those who identified as male, found that they had more financial and emotional well-being than those who identified as women. However, again, with the data, it shows that generally men tend to make more income than women, and a lot of times there is a relationship between feeling financially well and making more money. Then we also found students who are white, biracial, and 25 to 34 also have higher percentages above the benchmark. And if you want that data, I'd be happy to share it with you offline. So when I did the interviews, I really wanted to get to the crux of what made you discontinue your time at CC or at MSCC or at any other time if you had any difficulties, even if you didn't discontinue your time there. So all of the well-being variables that I discussed with them, which was the 8 dimensions of wellness, which included social, physical, financial, intellectual, occupational, flourishing, I think I'm spiritual. I think I mentioned all of them. They were all impacting our students. In addition, there were 3 that were found the most. And intellectual well-being really focuses on having motivation to be in school. And our students were not thriving when they were trying to survive. They were focusing on other components. A lot of the students also stated that they were forced to be in school due to their parents and they didn't have that intrinsic motivation. And if they weren't in school, they would most likely get kicked out. And that was environmental well-being. And lastly was occupational. The majority of students I interviewed did not know what major they wanted. They changed it several times, but they would rather work than actually continue their education because they got that immediate gratification of a paycheck. And I did put a quote to highlight. I don't want my mom to be disappointed in me. It kind of sounds messed up, but if she were to pass away and I was still in college, I probably would just leave. My heart's not in it. It just makes it more of a guilty thing because I'm like, I really should be doing well, but I'm not. And I don't care. I feel anxious that I should care. And this was just one quote of many. A lot of our students were not here because they wanted to be here. They felt like they had to. I also wanted to focus on what resources were they using? Were they using any? What worked? What didn't? What did MSCC need in order to support these students? And none of them used any of the resources until after they became part of the academically at-risk population. And what I found very interesting was every single one of them said they wished they were forced to seek support. They wanted that consistent, not just the first year, but the consistent person that they could reach out to every single semester so that they would know what resources were available. And I was really shocked because some of them said, you know, if I was mandated, I would have used it. And some could argue, well, it's their responsibility to use it. But I disagree with that. They don't always remember what resources are available. And when they're struggling with their well-being, they're not going to know all the resources. And sometimes just looking online, looking on the website, which can be confusing to them, is overwhelming, and then they just won't look at it. But if they had someone that forced them, they said that if they were mandated to speak to someone, they said their life at MSCC would be much easier. So I'll read these two quotes for you really briefly, but I got a lot of quotes like this. They just kind of throw you out there, like figure out what you got to do. In high school, everyone is there to help you. Everyone's in your face. Students aren't going to know how to fend for themselves. I just turned 22 and I still don't think to get help. To be able to know I can at least go to this one person, ask them what's going on, that would have been helpful for me. So I found some main themes, and how am I on time? Okay, I'm good. So the big thing I noticed was the absence and the presence of well-being really made a difference. And I'm using dominoes to discuss it, the well-being dominoes. And I'm going to share one story that really highlights how the different well-being variables influence one another. So I had a student whose parents were undocumented, and she really focused on trying to help them stay in America, and that took up a lot of her time. She really explained how that influenced her mental health and how that influenced her priorities. So she had left MSCC a couple of times and came back. More recently, she explained that she was cleaning houses with her mom. She's a non-traditional student. And when COVID occurred, she had no income because she couldn't go into the houses anymore. And that right there is financial well-being. So to supplement income, she ended up leasing out rooms in her home. And she ended up getting COVID. Because her mom was older, she did not want to expose her to COVID. So she ended up sleeping in her car. So now we have physical well-being, and now we have environmental well-being. She lost service on her phone, but prior to that, she wasn't able to focus on her classes. She didn't reach out to her professors. She didn't respond to any emails. At that time, she became significantly depressed and anxious. That is emotional well-being. And she just felt physically very ill from COVID. She was unsafe. She had someone try to break in her car. And she really struggled that semester. Now, if she was forced to meet with someone or highly encouraged to meet with someone periodically, potentially we could have told her about CARES grants and other amazing resources that were available at that period of time for her. So because she was really struggling with her financial well-being, it influenced all the other well-being variables, which then impacted her intellectual well-being because she was no longer focused or motivated on school. Now, if we had support visible throughout from the beginning, she had someone she was talking to on a consistent basis, we could have told her about those resources that were available. On the other side of things, I had students who explained that when they were more aware of who they are, when their well-being was present, they were able to be successful. One student said, once I came out to my family, I knew who I was. I went to classes. I was no longer depressed. I was eating again. I started working again. And now I have a 3.5 and I'm about to graduate. And this was a student who was previously dismissed. So they were really striving to self-improve themselves, and they didn't just want to pass at college, they wanted to excel. And the majority of them were already off of academic probation, and they were doing it. They were about to graduate or close to it. So overall findings, the presence and absence of well-being can influence college continuation. We know that. In fact, out of the 15 students I interviewed, 80% of them, 11 of them discontinued their time at MSCC. Only 5 were dismissed, but the rest of them either chose to because of their well-being. They actually did choose to because of their well-being, but all of them were impacted. 100% of the students I interviewed were impacted by well-being categories for at least 2 categories. However, 13 out of 15 of them were impacted by 5 or more of the well-being components. And then pertaining to their survey, which were different students, 75% of them were unwell in at least one category. So this is really significant. Our students, the reason why they did not do well in their studies was because of external circumstances that influenced their well-being. I'm not going to go over this as much. All right, so recommendations, some things to think about. Are we providing intentional outreach? What are we doing to really get the word out that we're here to support our students instead of using that deficit model of asking them to initiate support? What are we doing so that we can really use something like the public health approach, the public health model, in which everyone is supporting our student body, from our janitorial staff to our faculty? What can we use? Learning management systems? Can we use learning communities? It's going to look different at every institution, but there are ways to make intentional support known for our students on a regular basis. And that's when we consistently conduct overt outreach. This is something that we want to really be mindful of so that we can make sure students are aware of all the resources. And then really, as a campus community, have different trainings for everyone involved so that they know what is available for students, how to speak with students. Sometimes people don't realize just saying, hi, how are you? I mean, I think everyone on this call knows this, but sometimes our faculty and staff are not aware of that. So this is actually an article that I had published, Wellbeing is a Student's Best Friend, Strategies to Support Community College Continuation. And the 3 recommendations I really focus on was consistently conduct overt outreach, hold holistic programming, and promote partnership. Because if we don't create a climate of well-being in our institution as a whole, how can we teach it and promote it? And then engage students in dialogue to support well-being. If we don't show students that we're open and we're ready to support them, they're most likely not going to come to us and work with us in that capacity. This is the publication. If you would like it, I could also email it to you. And I'm ready for questions. Thank you.
Wow, Ariella, fantastic. Thank you. We have, let's see, something in the chat from Susan. The challenges students, all of us, juggle shoulder are a lot. That we persevere amidst it all, attest to individual grit, drive, but also how important it is to understand students' needs, motivations, and challenges as your research reveals. So a comment, but not a question. But boy, so dead on there, so right on there, Susan, as you point out. And as you led at the beginning of your presentation, talking about there's so much out there on the deficit, let's look at the other side of the coin. And for those students, as you were wrapping up, for those students who do have that self-value and that self-worth, and that helps to provide them, promote them, that maybe it's that's what drives their grit. That's why they have it. That's why they can move forward. Just wow. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think part of our job is to help them find that self-worth.
Yes.
Because a lot of our students don't have it, especially due to the competing responsibilities that they continuously have. And so having that conversation, asking them, how are you, making it known that these supports are available on a regular basis, not just on a one-time thing, I think is essential in order to holistically support our students.
Absolutely. Folks, across the board, any additional questions or comments from anyone? Yeah, I see
Hey
Kelly. Hi,
Ariel, hey
Kelly.
Jake.
Hey,
Um,
Kelly.
Kelly?
Sorry I missed the first few minutes, but overall, Ariel, I thought that was awesome. It's definitely in line, and I know we've talked a little bit about our affinity group, a lot of the work that we're trying to implement here at our college, and I know so many of our partners are as well. We've invested in Caring Campus, which is a training initiative campus-wide for just developing like I think you just said it on the last slide, like making sure we greet every student. And it's not, do you need help? Because some students feel, well, I don't belong here if they're asking if I need help. It's just, hi, I'm Kelly. I work at the college. How's your day going? Oh, did you need help finding it? Just those simple things that we can all do, those simple behaviors that really can make a huge difference in connecting students with resources early.
Absolutely. And you bring up a good point. I was in such a rush, I forgot to mention. I think it's important to focus on cultural components because there's a
Mhm.
lot of intersectionality when it comes to supporting our students. And our students are, a lot of them are taught not to ask for help. And
Yep.
that is really what came up in my research. They said, I want to be mandated. They actually, all of them said, I would have wanted someone to mandate me to speak with them because then I would
Mhm.
not be where I am today and I would not have wasted money on the classes I didn't complete.
Mhm. Yeah, it's not a perfect system or one that can be rolled out everywhere, but I swear by the fact that we mandate every student to get advisor authorization. Now, that looks different for all students. That could be an advising appointment, that could be a passing conversation in the hallway with our faculty, just some touch point prior to registration so that we know if they have questions and hopefully they're getting information during those interactions, something before they go and register. So hopefully they're staying on the path to complete their degree.
And I think that's where intrusive advising and intrusive support
Mhm.
comes in. I was telling Dr. Furman about that. I'm coining the term intrusive support. I actually think that is a term, but I think
Yep.
it's really important because we need to know what to ask and we need to be able to provide those resources even when they don't talk about it, because a
Hmm.
lot of times, due to fear or embarrassment, they won't.
Yeah. Or they think I shouldn't bring that up. No one should know
Exactly.
that. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, we're here and we have a lot of resources, even if it's not on campus. We have a lot of connections that we can share with them.
Exactly.
Great job.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Any other questions? I could talk about this all day, but I think I have 3 more minutes. And again, that was just the really quick version of it. I'd be happy to go more in depth. Some of the demographic data was really fascinating. Um, spoiler alert, everyone has well-being concerns. I think we all know that, but well-being does not discriminate, so we all experience it. But what I did find interesting that there was no significant difference with race and ethnicity. But that could also be because our students were not as open to talking about it because of cultural components.
Any other questions, folks, or comments? See a couple thank yous in the chat. Intrusive advising, very important, and whether you may think that's a term already or not, but intrusive support. What was it again, Ariel?
Intrusive support. So,
Intrusive support. From now on, I'm going to say it's Dr. Ariella Panek that's coined that. And, well, that's what I'm going to go with.
well, thank you.
Well, thanks everybody, and thank you, Dr. Panek, for doing this for us. I think we're going to pivot now. We're going to go to Dr. Kristen Wilson of Rowan College of South Jersey. We're so delighted that she's with us today. Kristen, you should be able to share your
All
screen.
right, let's see. And let me put on the actual slideshow here.
There we
Everybody,
go.
all right, wonderful. Let's see here. So, all right. So my name is Kristen Wilson. I am the Director of Behavioral Services over at RCSJ on the Gloucester campus. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my dissertation research with you all. I am a doctor of social science with a focus in prevention science, which is a little off-center from the normal, typical terminal degrees that you see in the higher ed world. But my dissertation and the focus of my work really is how those two worlds actually overlap. And, and I had this in my dissertation and I'm sharing it with you all. So this is the working model that I created. Simple, but it's to depict my perspective that was going into this study. So this diagram illustrates the overlap of prevention science and student retention theory, which are two heavily researched areas of study that don't traditionally intersect. And so while some student retention theories may discuss environmental variables that can lead to attrition, the primary focus is degree completion. And so I use Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model as my overarching theoretical framework, which is from the prevention science world. And I supplemented it with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as well as a hard to find information about retention theory, so Bean and Metzer's conceptual model of non-traditional student attrition. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about those theories. I can, talk with anybody offline about them. But when I was doing my initial research, I was really struggling to find student retention theories that were applying to community colleges in a meaningful way. And so that was part of the gap in research that I found. And so the purposes of the study, for the purposes of this study, I found that previous studies had either conducted quantitative research, omitted mental health as a risk factor for attrition, or didn't concentrate their research on community college faculty. And so about prevention science. So prevention science seeks to address the root of those environmental variables to improve the well-being of individuals, families, communities, and when considered together, institutions of higher education can actually redefine what it means to be student-centered to also include the students' human experiences outside of the classroom, which we're here, right? We're working in community colleges. We know that their human experiences can't be separated from their student status. We can't pull that, from their educational experience. And so while community colleges and universities, might not be fully prepared to address all of these concerns, I think a lot of us are doing a lot of great work. But it does behoove us to recognize and address what is in our control if we really want to get those students to the finish line. And so here's my brief review of the literature. So mental health conditions are prevalent among college students, with anxiety disorders as the most common and depression as being the second most prevalent. And so the age of onset for anxiety and depression range from middle childhood to adulthood, which is implying that college students are both entering college with pre-existing mental health conditions, or they're developing them for the first time while they're in college with us. And for non-traditional students, balancing academic demands with their work and family pressures may lead to the development or exacerbation of mental health conditions. And so I found that more than 50% of community colleges meet the criteria for at least one mental health condition. And for my literature review, I focus on these contributing factors to mental health conditions. So basic needs insecurity, which encompasses food insecurity, housing insecurity, and homelessness, and various types of trauma and how they impact college student attrition. For many students who are experiencing hunger and homelessness, that is a traumatic event for them, and that can contribute to worsening mental health conditions. And then in 2019, the New Jersey Office of the Secretary of Higher Education partnered with the Hope Center out of Temple University, and they conducted a statewide survey of community college students' basic needs. Not sure if any of you remember that. And they found that 56% of New Jersey community college students report some form of basic needs insecurity. And this is similar to data that was released in the fall of 2022, which was right when I was defending my dissertation. And so I had to edit my defense. But it's similar to data from a national report from the Community College Survey of Student Engagement. And that found about 44% of students were reporting some form of food or housing insecurity. And now so I did look into the methodology to see, why those numbers were different, although, kind of similar. And if the methodology had been closer together, the numbers probably would have been closer as well. They use different instruments. But either way, the consistency of that data tells me that we probably have enough data by now, right? We've been doing these surveys and these inventories and asking questions for a little while now. And I think now's the time to look at student retention from a prevention science lens. And so, you know, when we're talking about trauma, so research has found that adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, can significantly predict whether a student develops a depressive or anxiety disorder, and that the effects of those ACEs can have long-term effects well into students' college years. Students with ACEs have been found to be at a higher risk of experiencing intimate partner violence in adulthood. Over 27% of community college women report intimate partner violence. 20% of those meet the clinical threshold for post-traumatic stress disorder. There have also been strong correlations found between the severity of intimate partner violence and the extent of PTSD, depression, school disengagement behaviors, and a decline in GPA. And then lastly here, collective trauma, it refers to a traumatic event that affects an entire population that may persist across generations. Cascading collective trauma is when multiple crises occur simultaneously and or consecutively. So in addition to this global public health crisis that we have all been enduring for 4 years now, which is crazy, it has taken over 1 million lives in the United States alone. Americans have also experienced substantial political unrest as well as racial social injustice, and that's not even looking at what is going on at a global scale. So there's a lot of stuff going on that everybody is just carrying with them all the time. And while there's little research on the effect of compounded collective crises, empirical evidence has shown the effects of a lifetime of adversity. Personal and contextual factors must be considered when you're examining mental health impacts, such as a history of adversity, pre-existing mental health conditions, lack of economic and or social resources, and community demographics. Told you this was my brief review. As we, have been hearing over the years, college and university faculty are frequently regarded as sources of support and can be a critical component in student persistence and success. And so this study provides a unique lens through which to examine community college faculty awareness of how student mental health impacts retention. Previous studies have either, again, have conducted quantitative research, omitted mental health as a risk factor for attrition, or didn't concentrate their research on community college faculty. And so my study consisted of 4 questions. How do community college members perceive and describe their role in student retention? How do community college faculty members perceive the relationship between student mental health and student retention? How do community college faculty describe their comfort level when addressing student mental health issues? And do community college faculty members share a common language surrounding mental health and resources? And so a little bit about my methodology here. So I used a phenomenological approach, which allowed me to understand and interpret the experiences of the community college faculty that I interviewed. Recruitment for this study was done with a population of faculty members from Mid-Atlantic region community college. And the inclusion criteria was any faculty member that was actively teaching at least one course in the previous academic year, which at the time was fall 21, spring 22, and summer 22. I used purposive and snowball sampling so that I could get a rich selection of participants. And the instrument that I used was a 12-question questionnaire, and it was adapted from a couple previous studies that I had come across that were doing similar research, but again, not conducting it specifically with community college faculty. I had 13 participants respond. I was only able to get 10 to complete the semi-structured interviews. It was the height of the pandemic, so they were done via Zoom. And, I did all of my coding in Atlas TI and whatnot. And so through my data analysis, there were 4 themes and 10 sub-themes that emerged. I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. So for theme 1, most faculty identified a relationship between what occurs in the classroom and student retention. They emphasized the importance of fostering connections and building relationships with students, and that faculty have an added responsibility to their role. For theme 2, faculty indicated that student retention occurs on multiple levels, so that staying within a course, retaking courses with the same faculty member, staying within a program, and staying within the college, which I thought was really interesting, because there are traditional ways that we measure retention, right? But when I was speaking with faculty, they had a lot of different definitions for that. Theme 3, when asked about life experiences that may contribute to mental health conditions, all participants were counted multiple. All but one was able to identify a connection between student mental health and retention. For that participant who was unsure, they didn't believe they were privy to know if there was a relationship between mental health and retention, and they suggested other offices that might. So they basically said, I don't think that's my business, so I don't know. And then an undeniable theme that had emerged from my analysis was that not only was professional development needed for community college faculty, but also that faculty want more information and strategies to support their students. And I thought that was important as well, because as administrators and staff, doing some of this work, we can say, oh yeah, we need professional development. We have to teach them. We have to explain to them, but also faculty want to know. And so figuring out that connection there of how to, okay, well, you want the information, but you have to attend the professional development days. So that's a whole separate issue. And then so my implications, and I framed my implications in the spectrum of prevention, which is a multifaceted 6-level framework for the development of prevention strategies. So again, I'm weaving in my higher ed and prevention science worlds here to really kind of break this out into many layers. And so this spectrum, this framework, it goes beyond the individual to address several opportunities for positive cultural change. And I love this model, and it's so funny because it was stressed so much during my program, and we used to joke about my one program coordinator. He always had it as his background on Zoom, and now I'm like, oh yeah, I have to pull up my spectrum of prevention because it's wonderful. It's a great representation, yes, but it's also it's showing that it's not a one size fits all, one strategy to rule them all sort of model. There are many different ways that we can go at these things here when we're talking about preventing dropout, preventing attrition, things like that. So an integrated approach to mental health promotion on community college campuses has the potential to prevent adverse mental health outcomes and crises while simultaneously creating a campus culture that prioritizes wellness. So we have this bottom layer of strengthening individual knowledge and skills. That's students, staff, faculty, that's our first level here. The next section is promoting community education, and that refers to how information is disseminated to the campus community at large. Think your emails, your posters, your Blackboard notifications, things like that. Educating providers, it dovetails with that first layer, but it goes further to provide actionable strategies that staff and faculty can implement when working with students, such as trauma-informed approaches to andragogy. As we're going up our spectrum here. So institutions can foster coalitions and network by creating a campus-based multidisciplinary student mental health team or entering memorandums of understanding with community mental health and social service providers, all of which can expand the amount of support that the campus is able to provide. It is strongly recommended that institutions examine and change their organizational practices to better support students' holistic well-being and to prevent attrition. As I mentioned, trauma-informed approaches are highly recommended. Jake saw my Seton Hall presentation with one of my colleagues. We talked about the trauma-informed higher ed piece. Love to talk about that a lot as well. And finally, it is exceedingly critical that institutions influence policy and legislation. That's the advocacy that's doing. We just had advocacy day, with the state, and making sure that our legislators and our folks who get to make some of these decisions are making them from a community college centric place. And so this prevention science lens can provide the foundation for a campus approach to mental health promotion, and that's ultimately going to foster student success. I feel like I went through that really quickly, but I wanted to make sure that I was mindful of everybody's time. I can talk about all of this, like Ariella said, all day long. But yes, if anybody has any questions, thoughts, I'm available for those.
So first, Kristen, I'll say thank you for doing this for us and for sharing your research and your findings. I'm interested from your perspective and how your research has informed the work that you're doing. I did see the presentation you gave at Seton Hall. Can you tell us a little bit about the work, whether it's you're doing or work you've seen in other places? That whole piece that stood out to me was the engagement of the faculty and getting them to go through the professional development. Can you talk to us a little bit through your perspective as whether it's best practices that you've been able to put into play, that you've seen in other places, that you may have seen in the research from your dissertation or from other things that you've done? What might be some of the takeaways on best practices that we may want to employ across the state to getting more faculty involved in learning, whether it's QPR, mental health, first aid, you name it, to have that better sense to support students? And the reason why I ask twofold: one, well, it's an important question, and I'm turning to you for your guidance. But two, many of you may know the Lieutenant Governor signed the Madison-Holler Amendment Act not too long ago that requires every year, it's annual, every year, everyone at a public institution or at an institution of higher education, public or private, has to have some kind of mental health and wellness professional development under their belt. Every year they have to do it. And so it's going to be up to the colleges to decide which of the tools they use, but above and beyond it being now a legislative and legal mandate, what else might be some best practices?
And so one of the things that came up through one of my interviews, and it was kind of echoed in some of the others, was having different having different types of professional development, because not everybody has an entire day to dedicate to a 9 to 4 training. Not everybody has time to go to the mental health first aid, even if it's offered virtually, right? And they split it into 2 days. That's a lot of time. And so a lot of those synchronous options are really, really hard for folks. And what I was finding in my interviews and even, conversations that I had outside of my actual, formal interviews, is that having different, options for folks. And so having asynchronous options, having options that are, I don't want to say like TikTok style and length, but the snippet videos that, okay, I can jump on and I have 10 minutes and I can watch, a quick video. And, so that I thought was really interesting, because we all learn differently, right? Some people are really great at that. It's an 8-hour lecture. I get a lunch in between and then I go about my day. But then there's some people that that just doesn't jive well for them. And so finding all these different ways that we can embed it. And then I think the most important piece, and this is where my, prevention science world overlaps, and is going to the community that you're trying to reach and find out what they want. And so whether that is your department meetings, your dean's meetings, your adjunct faculty mix, or, whatever it is that you're having when these meetings are already happening, they're already gathering, and it's finding out what it is that they want and how they want to learn and engage. And of course, you're always going to find the few that are like, I don't want to learn. I don't care. Leave me alone. I just want to teach whatever I'm teaching. You're going to find those. But by and large, that's not common. And it's just a matter of, okay, how do we do it? And maybe it's, maybe it depends on your contract, right? And if commencement's in the middle of May, but you're contracted through June 30th, maybe that's when you schedule it for your faculty before their contract ends, but before, you know, maybe they're not teaching a summer class. And so things are kind of a little loose there. But, you know, other than the different types of professional development in different modalities, and then just asking them directly, okay, how do you want to learn? You know, you're telling me that you want to learn more. I want to offer you this opportunity to learn more. Tell me how you would like to absorb it. And I think that's the most important part, which takes longer than just saying we scheduled a mental health first aid this year and we're done. But if we're looking for sustainability and we're looking for engagement, it's really just talking to your community faculty members. I hope that helps.
Very much so. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Feel free to ask, or you can put them in the chat, folks. Oh, here's Ariella.
Our topics were so great together.
Yeah.
So dovetailing.
Yeah,
Great job, Jake.
Yeah. I really enjoyed learning about this, and it really validates some of the things students told me as well. They said that they didn't feel comfortable sharing those things with a lot of faculty and staff because they didn't know that they could. So along with the gatekeeper trainings and everything that you described, would you agree that just having training about how to communicate with students would be helpful?
Yeah, and I think that's there's a really great resource that I think it's from Mental Health Association. I forget, but I can pull it. It's on our portal. But it's focused, it's geared towards students, but it's, you know, how can I talk to my professor about my mental health? And so I like using that as like a small, easy tool for students, but then you also have to have them know that, oh yeah, it's this professor as well, right? And, you know, I think that goes back to some of those first day conversations, because of course you can put it in a syllabus, nobody's reading that book. But, you know, being able to say like, look, I'm here, you know, maybe it's a slide that you put up and it's just there. It's not, you know, you mentioned, hey, we can talk about it. You revisit it a couple times just to kind of, you know, set that stage a little bit. But it's astounding how many, you know, faculty members that we have who are hearing some wild stuff coming from our students, and then they're getting it back to my office, and it's like, all right, trying to transition, like, okay, you don't need to keep telling your professor all of this stuff now, like it's fine. But yeah, just they need to know that they can share that with their professor, but the professor also has to set that stage. And I think it's such a culture shift for institutions of higher education, for professors, you know, especially if they've been around for a while. You know, they were content experts. They were delivering their content. There wasn't as much focus on, you know, the warm and fuzzies of, you know, being human centric. And that has shifted over the years, and it shifted because that's what our students want. And when you're looking at it from a business model perspective, which like I don't like to do, but everybody says that you should, it's good business to deliver what the students are looking for.
Yeah, and increase ROI for sure. And I like the idea, you know, what you mentioned about how to talk to my professors about mental health. I think maybe we can create one, if it doesn't already exist, how to talk to my students about life in general, because I think you know, in the article that I had written, I said something similar that you just said, you know, different strategies to incorporate that in everyday conversation, but it's very intimidating for a lot of people because it's uncomfortable for them to talk about it. So I like that idea, Kristen. I'm gonna
Thanks. Yeah. And I, you know, I was getting some pushback in my interviews as well, because, you know, folks were like, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I don't want to do it. And it's like, ooh, I'm not asking you to be a therapist. I don't want you to be a therapist, please. But I want you to have some of those soft skills to just listen and then refer appropriately. Like that's it. That's what I love about QPR, right? It's just you're consuming that information, you're questioning them, and then it's like, hey, you know what? Well, let's go get some help. Let's bring you over to where we need to go. You know, and I think that's really important. And you know, and I when I get direct pushback, you know, I was saying like, well, if your child like was having friends over and you notice that your child's friend was kind of going through something, would you not engage with them and say, oh, hey, Sarah, like, how are you doing? Like, you seem off today. You know, it's the same skills. You have all the same skills. It's just we're using them slightly different. And then Catherine, I see your question. So what is the responsibility of the larger community for assisting college age students? I mean, I think it's kind of everyone's responsibility. And that's just me. Again, I always say, like, I'm not a higher ed person. I'm a social service person that just happens to live in the higher ed world. I think it's everybody's, you know, when we're looking at trauma-informed approaches, I collaborated on, you know, a few things during my graduate program. And, you know, it happens from all levels, you know, and yeah, sure, the facilities person who's mopping the bathroom who noticed that somebody is crying isn't really going to do a lot of the, you know, higher level stuff that maybe the therapist would on campus, but you know, you're noticing that somebody is experiencing something, and then it's just like, hey, like, do you want to talk to somebody? Because like I know that there's somebody here that can do that, even if you don't know what it is. And I think it comes at different, I think it's everyone's responsibility. I hope that answers the question. I don't know if it does.
Great question, though, Catherine. Great answer too, Kristen, because it's, you know, I look at it from the perspective of it's the larger community that resources make up that community, and it's the partnerships. Ariella and Kristen both touched on it in their presentations. It's the partnerships that the community colleges can make to those members of the community, whether it's whether it has to do with childcare or hunger or mental health and wellness or healthcare or you name it, it runs the gamut. And all of our colleges do this. All of our community colleges in the state do this, have comprehensive partnerships with those in the community to provide. It's kind of like it's the warm handoff, right? That's what you folks were referring to, Ariel and Kristen referred to. It's the warm handoff, having that baseline awareness to be able to provide the warm handoff to someone on campus. But then depending on the level of the issue that the student's experiencing, may be able to be everything may be able to be taken care of there on campus, or they may require a warm handoff to one of those partners in the community. So it's a combination of the two. It's not just what's the responsibility of that community, it's the responsibility of the college to ensure that we have those partnerships and that we're working collectively, right? Because it's all about meeting our mission. Those partners in the community, they're probably more than likely nonprofits. You know, their mission is to support, whether it's mental health, whether it's wellness, whether it's addressing hunger, you name it. Their mission is to do that. And if they can help fulfill their mission by partnering with the community college, it's win-win across the board. But ultimately, it's the students who benefit. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, everybody. Let me thank everybody for being here today.